So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today from around the globe. My name is Noelle Hutton, and I am an organizer with Community Alliance for Global Justice, who is hosting this webinar today. And before I give you an overview for what's in store this next hour and a half, we want to center our conversation ahead in the realities of this critical time in which we are living, the weight of which is felt for some much more than others. We are called together here during a time of immeasurable suffering, and while for some a so-called normal feels as if it's around the corner, the end of this tunnel is a long way away for many. More than 130 countries currently have no access to COVID vaccines, nor the ability to make plans to vaccinate their populations. The entire African bloc has said to the World Trade Organization that they don't want intellectual property rights over vaccines. Yet the US, the EU, and the Gates Foundation supported COVAX initiative are insistent on protecting private pharmaceutical profits amidst this global pandemic, forgetting that no one is safe until we are all safe. Much of what we will be highlighting today in the arena of agriculture and climate is also playing out in the fight for vaccine equity. Even more, the upcoming United Nations Food Systems Summit, set to be held this fall, is another massive push for corporate capture. All of this is coming at a time when civil society is stretched so thin. It is exhausting and it is hard to focus on climate. But these struggles do not exist in isolation, and our movements are interwoven and interdependent. Today, I am joining you all from Tetsuge Owinge, the narrow place of cottonwood trees just north of Ogopoge, also known as Santa Fe, New Mexico, the ancestral and continued homelands of Tewa peoples. This region is a unique point on Turtle Island, a fluid conjunction where many nations have come together and where Native communities have always protected what has rightly come to be known as the land of enchantment. So let us all ground ourselves wherever we may be to the lands and waters among which we are fortunate enough to be held in this moment. And to the indigenous communities around the world who comprise 6% of the world's population while caring for some 80% of the world's biodiversity, who since time immemorial, through deep listening to our Mother Earth, have continued to remember how to live in alignment with this place we all call home. Today, we hope to remember also to listen to the countless frontline communities who are fighting for change, whose transformation for environmental justice comes not from some miraculous technological innovation, but a return to deeper ways of being and knowing in this world that seek to break this cycle of extraction and cultivate a just transition towards regeneration and reciprocity with our fellow human and more than human relatives. May we also ground ourselves in the labor of the oppressed upon whose backs this world has been built, including the pillaging of the earth that by some chance allowed us to meet one another today, wherever we may be through this digital lens. May we be grateful for the energy that made all of this so, and use what we have been gifted in a good way to imagine a world new. And so now I will pass it off to CAGJ's director, the lovely Heather Day, who will give an overview of our Gates Foundation campaign. We will then be joined by our incredible panelists who have so graciously taken time out of their busy schedules to join us all today, after which we will have a discussion moderated by our amazing AgriWatch member, Matt Canfield. And we welcome your questions and comments in the chat throughout, and we will try to integrate your remarks should we have time. And that's it. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Noelle. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Community Alliance for Global Justice was founded in the aftermath of the 1999 protests against the World Trade Organization here in Seattle. We're a Seattle-based membership organization with members around the world. And this year we turned 20 years old. And in 2008, we founded AgriWatch, our campaign to hold the Gates Foundation accountable for their agricultural development work promoting a so-called green revolution. This past year, we were excited to publish these 2 reports, which we encourage you to find on our website. The Messengers of Gates agenda focuses on how the Cornell Alliance for Science trains African fellows to create propaganda supporting the Gates Foundation's programs. And The Man Behind the Curtain describes the Gates Foundation support for the appointment of Agnes Kalibata to chair the UN Food Systems Summit. When AgriWatch learned that Bill Gates was publishing a book on climate, we immediately knew that we needed to organize this event. Gates, the 3rd richest man on Earth, whose wealth has increased $20 billion since the onset of the pandemic last year, has a huge platform for getting his ideas out there. And here you can see some of the hosts and event locations just for the first 2 weeks of his book launch. His book launch comes on the heels of the revelation that Bill and Melinda Gates are now the largest private farmland owners in the United States. And it seems that he is everywhere. But the food sovereignty movement that he seeks to overmine is also everywhere. And today we're very proud to feature 4 leaders who I'll introduce in a moment and who will help us make sense of the problems with the technology-centered solutions that Gates proposes. While we appreciate Gates using his platform to add urgency to addressing climate change, we had several concerns even before the book was published that persist, having read the book this past week. Given the unparalleled role of Gates and his foundation in championing industrial agriculture, a major contributor to climate change around the world, it is quite ironic and indeed deeply problematic to see him become a spokesperson for climate solutions. AgriWatch, the campaign of CAGJ, was formed in an effort to hold the foundation accountable. However, it is nearly impossible, and we see the foundation wielding power undemocratically in a range of sectors, from education to public health. We know that climate chaos and food systems are deeply intertwined, and that agriculture plays a major role in driving the climate crisis, as the Oakland Institute has documented, as well as many others. According to a 2019 report by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, globally, food systems contribute at least 1/3 of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. The green revolution that Gates has funded through AGRA, as well as several other institutions, is centered on technology-based approaches that promote hybrid or genetically modified seeds. And these are used in capital-intensive, large-scale agriculture with a prominent role for pesticides and chemical fertilizers. This model of agriculture tends to intensify the use of fossil fuels and chemical inputs in monocrops, thereby increasing the carbon emissions and environmental degradation, while also increasing the vulnerability of our food supply to climatic shocks. Meanwhile, food sovereignty and the practice of agroecology offer important climate solutions, which we'll hear more about today. Agroecology, for those who may be unfamiliar, is a science, movement, and practice. It's based on applying ecological concepts and principles to optimize interactions between plants, animals, and humans in the environment, while very importantly, taking into consideration the social aspects that need to be addressed for a sustainable and fair food system. The Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa has many, many excellent resources and case studies available on their website about how agroecology mitigates and adapts, putting carbon back into the soil and provides innovative ecological solutions to meet the climate challenges. So there are 3 primary reasons why we're skeptical of Gates and opposed to the models he promotes. First, while Gates is able to muster enormous public and private support, the solutions he promotes actually often fail. And a glaring example is demonstrated by the False Promises report just published recently, which documents the dramatic negative effects of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa on small-scale food producers in the 13 countries this initiative focuses on. AGRA's promised to double the agricultural yields and incomes of 30 million small-scale food producer households by 2020. And instead of having hunger, the situation in the 13 focus countries has worsened since AGRA was launched. The number of people going hungry has increased by 30% during the AGRA years. And I encourage you to check out the report to understand better. the failures of Agra. Second, the solutions that Gates and his foundation promote often exacerbate inequality. We've seen this with the impact of industrial agriculture on Africa's small-scale farmers and other food producers. Right now, we're also seeing this in the COVID vaccine space, where there's a battle brewing over intellectual property rights versus equitable distribution. The Gates Foundation has been at the center of the global COVID response through developing vaccines and have championed an approach that promotes proprietary intellectual property rights, even though they are opposed by much of the world's poorest, and these innovations are also the product of public investment. Additionally, Gates promotes an approach to global problems that simply reproduces global hierarchies of power. It's centered largely on expanding opportunities for multinational corporations in the private sphere. For example, in his book, he says that, quote, lowering the green premiums that the world pays is not charity. Countries like the US shouldn't see investing in clean energy research and development as just a favor to the rest of the world. They should also see it as an opportunity to make scientific breakthroughs that will give birth to new industries composed of new major companies. In other words, he seeks to make these global problems business opportunities by using public investment in the global north to limit the risk of global corporations. Yet across all of these cases, we see that the poor and marginalized remain so. As Silvia Ribeiro, one of our speakers today, and her co-author wrote, like many billionaires, Gates has a blind spot when it comes to questioning the logic of capitalism. Nearly every solution Gates proposes for the climate centers on innovation by entrepreneurs driven by the promises of profits. The third reason we're skeptical of Gates' proposed solutions to the climate crisis is that he and the foundation have been working towards fundamental transformations in governance that are undemocratic. He is pushing policies that are closing democratic spaces such as the United Nations. This is very apparent with the push right now towards the United Nations Food Systems Summit, scheduled to take place this September in New York. Ever since the president of Agra, Agnes Kalibata, was appointed as a leader of the summit, it has been apparent that the organizers are seeking to rewrite the narrative on global food. This is clearly a backlash to the fact that the Committee on World Food Security at the United Nations has been a space where the global food sovereignty movement has had considerable momentum in recent years, which is why over 500 organizations demanded that Kalibata be revoked and why many civil society organizations are refusing to participate in the summit. So we believe we must signal an alarm about Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation's ever expanding influence in policy arenas. And we're really grateful to our many partners around the world with whom we're collaborating on this very issue. And we're grateful to all of you for having joined us today to learn more from our speakers. So it's now my honor and pleasure to introduce them. I'm going to do that in the opposite order that they'll speak. So first of all, Milian Belay is coordinator of Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. And as an alliance of alliances, AFSA is building the largest social movement in Africa with 40 member networks active in 50 countries whose members reach over 200 million people. And CEGJ and AgriWatch are very proud to be a member of AFSA. Milian is a founder and former director of Melka Ethiopia, an indigenous NGO working on issues of agroecology, intergenerational learning, advocacy, and livelihood improvements of indigenous peoples. Silvia Ribeiro is the Latin American director for ETC Group, which monitors the impact of emerging technologies and corporate strategies on biodiversity, agriculture, and human rights. She's based in Mexico and speaks and writes about transgenic and other new technologies, corporate concentration, intellectual property, and the rights of indigenous peoples and farmers. Recently, Silvia co-authored a brilliant article entitled "The Sugar Daddy of Geoengineering, Bill Gates' Fossil Fuel Interests and Funding for Global Climate Engineering." Tom Goldtooth is executive director of Indigenous Environmental Network, which is an alliance founded in 1990 of indigenous peoples whose shared mission is to protect the sacredness of Earth Mother from contamination and exploitation by respecting and adhering to indigenous knowledge and natural law. Tom is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation and acts as a policy advisor to indigenous communities throughout the US and globally on environmental protection, and more recently, also on climate policy, focusing on mitigation, adaptation, and concerns of false solutions. Jill Mangalaman is executive director of Got Green, They were born and raised in Seattle and have led Got Green since 2014. Got Green builds community power by waging visionary campaigns at the intersection of racial, economic, gender, and climate justice. Got Green's climate justice organizing draws the links between gentrification, displacement, and community power, advocating for fair housing, dignified work, public transit, and healthy food. And both Got Green and Indigenous Environmental Network are members of Climate Justice Alliance. So with that, I want to welcome Jill, and then next we'll hear from Tom. Thank you so much for being with us, Jill.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, CAGJ. Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Mangaliman. I'm here in Seattle, Washington, also known as the territories of the Duwamish. We recognize their sovereignty over this land and support their fight for their rightful rightful rights to this area in the Coast Salish Sea. And even though Got Green is a local urban environmental justice organization, we are in solidarity with other communities around the country as well as the world. We see this as the need for solidarity, international solidarity, very important as our actions and impacts here in the US, here in Seattle, have ripple effects on other communities. And so it's not just enough to care about what's happening in our backyard, but with our neighbors in other countries and other friends who are fighting for justice. So shout out to the Indian farmers on strike. Shout out to the Lumad in the Philippines who are defending their ancestral lands from mining companies. I want to really just dig into how we view food as connected to climate. It's been a journey at Got Green. We were really focused on in the early days around training green jobs because we saw the connection between poverty and climate change, right? Like the people who are poorest or who are unemployed will probably have the most challenges with climate change. And through time, we actually started to learn deeper about the impacts of climate, as well as the impacts in our community. And myself included, thought that climate change was something that wasn't going to happen to us or was something like far away. But it's actually happening right now in other countries. And even here in the Northwest, we're experiencing effects of climate change, from wildfires to extreme weather events. And now we see a pandemic and a crisis. But I'll share, in 2012, we did a community-based research. We wanted to learn from our neighbors, what are their priorities, what are they facing, and how do they define the green economy? Not how the UN defines the green economy, but what is the economy that you want to see? And I'll share in the chat, this project focused with women of color and low-income women, immigrant women in South Seattle. And this was the basis of our food access work. And what we heard was that, majority of the people identified the food access to healthy foods as a main priority. The concern of not being able to feed their families, not having healthy food in their neighborhoods, not being able to afford it was their number one challenge, as well as geography. And from that, we decided to form local campaigns around it, including forming a leadership team. And in this, we started to learn that, with climate change, access to healthy foods will even become more out of reach for our communities who already are experiencing food deserts or lack of affordability of food in their communities. And this really launched a campaign around Fresh Bucks. And this was a campaign to ensure that that low-income families or people who are identified in the food security gap could access local healthy foods from local farmers. And so the impetus wasn't around making profit but really how do we get healthy foods into the hands of community members in South Seattle. And we were able to win this program, and see our own community members be able to connect with farmers markets, local farmers, food that was organic and affordable, because we know that the rising cost of food is an issue that people identified. Um, and to this day, that program has been, expanded in other cities, other states, as well as been a kind of like a program that has been since also shifted into emergency food vouchers for in the time of the pandemic. And so in the last year, food access has also become even more a concern. As we know, like with crisis, people really, like, again, that is like one of their basic priorities is how am I going to feed my family? um, and with climate change, and that is the ultimate crisis. If the pandemic has taught us anything, that we're not ready to take care of our people, and so we need more programs that are at the ready to support people in times of crisis, and not just in crisis but their day-to-day needs. um, and we also found ourselves too at Got Green having to support the distribution of FreshBooks. Unfortunately, government isn't very good at having relationship with community, and so um, making sure folks even learn how to connect to the farmers markets, or where can they use their FreshBooks? How do we make sure they're in different languages? And last but not least, like in the time of the crisis, like how do we distribute emergency vouchers? This all to say that, while we're talking about like food is an emergency, and we are learning that it's not enough to have food dollars, that we actually need, land and space for our communities to grow locally. Um, and just knowing that as climate change worsens in all around the world, we really do need to be able to grow our own food locally in our own neighborhoods. um, Even right now, we're looking into how do we build up the resiliency internally in our communities, so that right so that we don't contribute further to the exploitation of farm workers or other peasant struggles around the world. um, and then, so yeah, last but not least, we really are about community solutions. I think what really disturbed me about Bill Gates' book is that it's pro market solutions, and you know we're not trying to make profits around this economy or this situation. And it just really sent a red flag to me that Microsoft is buying up renewable energy credits and buying up forests. It makes me think of the cap and trade issue that Senator and Governor Inslee keep bringing up here in Washington, that we can buy our way out of this crisis, that we can use smart accounting to show that we're zero emissions, and still trying to push these market-based solutions when we know the solutions need to happen on the ground. We know that it shouldn't be around making money, but really how do we get people access to their basic needs and stop displacing them from their homes. And I think that there's a lot to learn from learning from our community members who are resilient and are directly impacted. So yeah, I would just plug call Inslee, call Carlisle, and tell them to stop pushing cap and trade. SB SB 5126 is the bill number for cap and trade. There's other market-based types of false promises that are being proposed in Washington. Like they say the same thing, right? Like buy more green products, or buy more cars. but our community members keep saying like, we just want, better transit, or we want to be able to stay in our neighborhoods with our loved ones and not live far away and be stuck in traffic for so long to get to work. How do we redistribute wealth so that there aren't very rich people like Bill Gates, and everyone has what they need? um, I think that if anything, we've learned from the food access team that if you talk to people about what their issues are, and you organize with them and they feel very strongly, you can see people feel uh, very powerful, and talk directly to their legislators and tell them like, stop harming our communities. I think that that is at the end of the day, the thing that we can do for climate change is to organize our neighbors and to really empower them to speak up and speak out against these corporations that are trying to make money and profit off of us and our health. So I'll end it with that. But thank you for hearing me out. I'll also I think I'll drop the chat a blog post from Front and Centered about cap and trade. So if you want to read more, or there's our statement, you can read that too. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Jill. Got Green's work has been just so essential in our state and even, nationally, really playing such an important leadership role. Really appreciate all that you do. So it's now my honor to welcome Tom Goldtooth. It's really a privilege to have you here with us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the best is in actually all the kota bashishi. How me dakiapi. And better day chante was stay iuha na pay to use apedo. Thank you, greetings, all my relations. I'm both Dene, Navajo, and Dakota. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint here. I hope I can do it real quick here. And now I got to bring up the power slide. Okay, can people see that? Can you see that?
Yep, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I just want to quickly go through my 8 minutes as quickly as I can to give a snapshot. I'm also a member of the ETC group, and I have a sister that's going to be speaking after me that has more of the knowledge and the technical knowledge around these geoengineering. But I wanted to be part of this educational session, looking once again on how big money comes in with solutions. I have looked at the Gates book on how to avoid climate disaster. It's interesting. I got a chuckle out of that. And it's promoting innovation. It uses that term, but also it focuses on a term that he's campaigning around called green premiums. Green premiums. That triggers some old stuff with me as we're continuing to fight an economic system that exploits the sacredness of Mother Earth, keeps on taking and taking issues of ownership over nature. And it just has a lot of things with green premiums. But the emphasis that Gates is pushing is investing in technologies. And I thought that as a foundation, as I speak about this, I want to share in traditional knowledge that that we have within our Diné people, our Navajo people, and our Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations. But most indigenous peoples and tribal nations that I've talked to, we have a common grounding on who we are and our relationship to the sacredness of our grandmother Earth, our Mother Earth, and Father Sky, the universe, the the cosmos, the cosmology. And I wanted to share that with you because that's the foundation that many of our indigenous peoples in the North and the global South uh, have articulated, is that a lot of the people, the settlers from Europe somehow have lost this understanding and relationship of who they are within that circle of life of Mother Earth. So it's a time for us to share our original instructions. And part of that is understanding how we relate to the universe, to the stars. And I really treasure this photograph of the Milky Way. We have many different stories, our own genesis as indigenous peoples. And within that, on the Navajo or Diné side, this symbolizes that relationship between the Mother Earth and the Father Sky. And there's many teachings that are woven into this on how that's part of the creative cycle or natural law of life itself. And other different graphics that symbolize that relationship with the moons and the four directions and our relationship between the land and the sky and ceremony and our relationship to the animals. Many of our teachings with our Diné people is that we are the five-finger clan people. We're able to use all the fingers, including the thumb. How we use the thumb is very critical. We can use it also to do damage to the earth or damage to ourselves. So there's teachings on how to maintain your balance in your life, your Joni. So the five-finger clan, we are all five-finger clan. How you use this is very critical. Now in geoengineering and the techno fixes, I'm going to just go through this real fast because I'm sure Sylvia is going to pick up on this. We call it as the objectification of nature, the objectification of that sacredness of our Mother Earth. But in the same way, we're confronting a system of this world, a matrix that objectifies our woman. It's the same connection of the sacred. And these are some of the acronyms of some of the technologies that's woven into Gates' push for green premium, for investment of innovative technologies. Carbon capture and storage, for an example. Carbon capture use and storage, which is a recycling process of the storage of the capture of carbon dioxide. And there's so many factors that actually involved in these technologies that there's no guarantee that once they capture that CO2 and force it into the earth, that it's going to stay there. And Sylvia will talk, I'm sure, to the contradictions of these technologies, but also the role of a system of sky predators messing with the atmosphere, the stratosphere, cloud seeding, scope X. And it does involve natural capital accounting, putting nature in our ecosystems into an ecological services system, financialization of nature, green economy, reduction of our ecosystems to a commodity reality. Nature-based solutions is part of that. Carbon pricing, carbon offset, yes. But it also involves a colonial system of laws and legal system. I get a lot of this direction that we take within our Indigenous Environmental Network from our elders. It was Roberta Blackgoat that once said when she went from Big Mountain on our Navajo reservation to the United Nations, she says, I'm here to speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. She was talking about the earth. She was talking about the medicines, the stones, and that's what we believe in. Now, when we talk about the capturing of the carbon, the capturing of the the emissions, the dirty emissions. This kind of symbolizes a lot about what I'm talking about. You know, they're putting it into these containers and they're investing in that. But there's no guarantee that that is going to stay there, but yet they're benefiting now. Our nature is not your solution. That's what we need to say to those, to that matrix out there. We need to say that to Gates and even the circle of the Biden administration, which is getting a lot of influence from what Gates talking about, and the funding that came out of the Jeff Bezos fund, the Earth Fund, actually is putting money into some of the big NGOs that are going to be pushing what we're talking about. This is our innovation back home here. This is our innovation. This is our magic right here. This is our solution. This is part of our environment, our ecosystem. This is part of Grandmother Earth and the sacredness of the water of life. We need to keep this clean. And that's what they call wild rice. That's what Ojibwe people call menomen. That's what our Dakota people call psi. And this is one of my relatives, my brother, and he's out there ricing and using those knockers to knock the rice off the plants, the rice plants, into the canoe. And this is an old photograph, but this is also how the rice is brought in and it's processed in an old traditional way that does not involve any chemicals or machinery. This is how we are innovative. And we have to confront a colonial legal system that has a structure of dehumanizing the earth and nature. And part of the nature objectification, the Mother Earth is deemed as a property right, property laws. And sovereignty and the dominion, those issues are couched within that colonial legal system around treating food systems, natural goods, and nature as part payment for ecosystem services. So we do have solutions, food sovereignty movement that we're part of, and speakers are part of that's going to speak, that we need to be producing our own foods, and that the front lines are organizing and have won many battles in shutting down dirty energy. We were effective with shutting down the Key XL pipeline, but we're still dealing with the Enbridge Line 3, yes. Land justice, environmental land trusts within the urban areas as well as in rural areas. That's part of a solution that allows us to rethink how we move around, how we transport ourselves in the rural, urban, but suburb area as well, and energy democracy. There is a movement of grassroots providing direction to the policymakers on the Hill right now around the need for a transition away from a fossil fuel economy. Keep it in the ground campaign, including nuclear energy. And stop, scrap, throw out the fossil fuel subsidies. And also, weaning ourselves as Americans, this is everyone, from our addiction to consumption and waste. So those are some simple, solutions that we are pushing. And we have to be principled in that relationship and responsibility to that sacredness of Mother Earth and Father Sky. We're part of that sacred circle of the universe. And this determines our relationship with all life, to move towards a living economy, not a death economy of capitalism and exploitation. That's what the Gates green premium means to us, is the exploitation, business as usual, buying out greenwashing by the industry, the polluting industry. They can use these technologies to escape their commitment from reducing the release of toxic emission. This is one geoengineering project that's in development in the Arctic at the top of the Earth, the Arctic Ice Project. And this is something that we're continuing to call out, bring attention to it. These are false solutions that violate the sacredness of Mother Earth. Thank you.
Hadn't heard about the Arctic Ice Project. Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing all of your wisdom. You've been leading this movement for decades, so we really appreciate you being here with us today. Sylvia, excited to hear from you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you, with all of you, and to have heard Tom and Jill, and of course, Million also will also be very happy to hear. And because I think it's this book is significant for many symbolic reasons, more than the book in itself. But I will start sharing some slides. So let me see. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. So many talks I start with this, just to remind us that who are the people that are really feeding the majority of the world population. And the majority of the world population, like 70% more of the world population, is fed by the networks of small food providers, like local food providers, peasants, small farmers, indigenous peoples, artisanal fisheries, pastoralists, urban growers, small-scale hunting and gathering, that in total have less than 25% of the land underwater, and only use about 10% of the fuel used in agriculture. And you can see there just roughly, more or less, who is producing what, where, so to say. And also that urban agriculture, for instance, is very important. So if that is the reality, that is the people feeding the majority, who is not feeding the majority of the world? Well, this is the agro-industrial food chain, which is in a context, as I put there, of food, health, environmental, climate, deep, and justice. Because the agro-industrial food chain feeds only the equivalent of 30% of the world's population, but uses 70 to 80% of the land, 80% of the agricultural water, and more than 90% of the fossil fuel in agriculture. And this is also the largest single factor that causes climate change. Even if you take Bill Gates' book and extrapolate, he fragments the information so you don't understand the links, but you extrapolate what it is given to agriculture and extrapolate the transports for transporting food and agriculture and livestock all over the world, or other monocultures and so, and the refrigeration for supermarkets and packaging and all that, and deforestation. Industrial food chain is the main cause of deforestation. So if you put all that together, it's about half of the climate change of the greenhouse gases causing climate change comes from the industrial food system. So it's also the main cause of the health crisis. This industrial food chain is behind the majority of the non-transmissible diseases, which is the main cause for death in the world today. And it's also the majority of the zoonotic diseases, like the one we have now, the pandemic, but also the avian flu, the swine flu, and many others. So it's not only about the disease of the environment, it's also the disease of people and the environment. It's also one of the main causes of the global environmental collapse, like by chemical pollution of water, erosion of soil, biodiversity. And it's completely controlled by I mean, completely. It's like in each step of the chain, you will have a handful of transnational corporations that dominate just that step. So it's about a few control the whole chain. So this is the context for the Gates recipe, you know. And when we read this book, I mean, it's I was amazed that he put all this together and remind us that Bill Gates is promoting so many nocive, damaging technologies at the same time. For instance, when he speaks on climate, he speaks throughout the book, and when he gives interviews, he speaks on getting to zero. But in the book, he explains that he means net zero. Net zero is not zero. This is about you can continue increasing emissions if you can offset them, if you can compensate them with either technological or carbon markets that in most cases will just increase the causes for climate change. So among the many risky technologies that Bill Gates proposes, for instance, nuclear energy, a full set of novel, riskier genetic modified organisms, including for agrofuels based on synthetic biology microbes, which will cause these are, the agrofuels he speaks about, they are supposed to be in a tank, and he pretends that this is not going to take any land, but this is about using large and monocultures of plantations of different things. And it's the same in a way also with all the artificial meat that is also requiring a lot of inputs into that, either GM soy, maize, sugars, to do what he calls artificial, he doesn't call artificial meat, but the synthetic meat, I think he calls it, or something else. And it's also about using synthetic biology, microbes and processes. So he's adding all the time new and more risks. And it's the same, for instance, he also proposed using, in these days of massive extinction that we may have heard, all of us at least in this call, there is so many species in danger of extinction. Well, he's proposing to use a new genetic modifying technology, which is called gene drives, that is directed to extinguish a species. And even in the book on climate, he reminds us that he will not abandon this kind of technologies that he uses. He says, this is really a PR drive, but he says that he is going to use this to extinguish mosquitoes, to protect from malaria. In reality, the majority of the uses for gene drives will be in agriculture for so-called plants and crops, pests, and even for insects in agriculture. So it's part of his, extreme technology recipes. And on climate, he also proposed manipulating the climate, not go into the causes of the problem, but manipulate the symptoms, either by removing the excess carbon dioxide or to block part of the sun rays that reaches the earth. And this is what is called geoengineering. He has been one of the pioneers on geoengineering. And I wanted to mention a little bit more on this. Basically, and he mentions this, geoengineering is about manipulation. Every ecosystem and every part, like Tom was speaking before me on Mother Earth and Father Sky, but also he speaks about oceans. Like everything could be engineered because he has a complete engineer mentality, which, and also, a profit engineering mentality. So this is what he proposes. But I wanted to highlight, sorry, I just want to mention one thing I said before. This about carbon capture and storage, that he also, throughout the book, he speaks about, well, if there is more emissions, we will capture them and store them. This in reality is a technology that the oil industry created, which was called enhanced oil recovery. And then they renamed it to carbon capture and storage because it is about injecting carbon dioxide into depleted wells and push deep reserves. So in reality, it's a way of exploiting more oil, but they call it now carbon capture and storage because it gives the impression that they will remove carbon from the atmosphere, which is absolutely not warranted. I wanted to mention one example of this, which is in the book, he makes also propaganda for his own companies, the companies he's invested in many cases with his personal fortune. And one of them is a company called Carbon Engineering. Carbon Engineering is a direct air capture company. These are like kind of funds, giant funds, many of them, with demand a lot of energy and will use solvents to capture carbon dioxide from the air. This company was founded by David Keith from Harvard. He's one of the most well-known promoters of geoengineering. And in the book, he explains that David Keith and Ken Caldeira were the people that explained climate for him. He learned about climate from geoengineers. In this company, the other investors are Chevron, Occidental Petroleum, Billiton, and Tarzan's billionaire Murray Edwards. So this is the kind of interest, this kind of climate companies he's invested in. David Keith, that I just mentioned, is also promoting just now one of the first open air experiments on the technology needed to block the sun, which is called the SCOPEX, that also Tom mentioned. It is about spraying aerosols in the stratosphere, supposedly to hinder part of the sun to reach in the earth. This, to have any effect on climate, it has to be deployed at large scale. But if they do that, for instance, over the Arctic, this is the main project, they would alter rain and wind patterns in Africa and Asia, and they will create droughts and endanger the source of food and water for 2 billion people. They, of course, need to start with a small experiment, and this experiment was planned in indigenous territories in Arizona, then in New Mexico, and now, in this moment when we speak, they are trying to make a first part of the experiment in Sami territory, in Kiruna, in Sweden. And they call this just a small experiment. They say, well, this is nothing will happen. This is just a balloon that we will try. Like an Swedish friend said, this is only the trigger, not the bomb. And the trigger cannot harm anyone. But the trigger doesn't have any meaning to have an experiment without the bomb. So as Heather was mentioning in the beginning, I would like to say that we already know he's one of the richest men, the largest landowner in the US. We also need to think that the digital industry is projected to be one of the largest the industries that will demand more than 20% of world's energy. So his recipe for Technofix is not only risky, it also aims to cause amnesia. Apparently, we don't need to question the causes of the crisis. Just trust a new technology that each time is more extreme, and that will solve the problem. And also the extremely concerning latent message that billionaires not only dominate markets and control technology, they can also dictate public policies and use state resources to provide the naval environments they need, including infrastructure. But as others have said and will continue explaining, there is also many real solutions. And the real solutions, that's why I started there. The main real solution, in fact, is related to our food, the way of producing the food. And there are today, the majority of the people in the world is fed by this system, these different diverse systems. So altogether, not only feeds the majority of the population, also preventing further emissions of climate change, and could also, like Via Campesina likes to say, could also cool part of the earth by restoring ecosystems and all that. There are many other real solutions, both urban and rural based, and many or most of them are based on strengthening and recuperating and creating communities, integrating cultural, racial, gender diversity for food sovereignty and climate justice. And here is a few of the documents that you can get at ETC Group's website that will explain more of the concept that I share here. Thank you very much.
So helpful, Sylvia. Thank you so much. Really fantastic. Thank you so much for tracking all these complicated issues to help us better understand what's going on, because it's really not easy to keep up with, honestly. Miljan, my friend, look forward to hearing you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I think you personally, or your spirit was looking over my shoulder when I was preparing, because in your excellent opening speech, you mentioned almost all of the points that I wanted to mention. Anyway, I would repeat them. Thank you very much, Heather, for the excellent work that you are doing. And thank you also for sending part of the book, which are concerned on agriculture. I read them. And my presentation will be based on what I read. And they've confirmed my fear about the book. He's a very powerful person. And whatever he says would have an impact in how I will talk about that a bit later on. And so I think I would summarize it in a few points. One, he fetishizes or admires Norman Borlaug quite a lot. Norman Borlaug is credited as a father of Green Revolution. He said that he produced some hybrid seeds, and he recommended the usage of agrochemicals. And because of that, in addition to the usage of irrigation, productivity has increased, and quite more than 100 million of people were out of poverty because of that. But the truth is, recent research on history of agriculture in India tells us that it's not normal Borlaug seeds or his recommendation, the Green Revolution recommendation. The increase in productivity has started from 1950s, and it's mainly because of irrigation that the productivity has increased. Actually, Green Revolution has an environmental, cultural, and a social health impact in India, and that's very well documented. That's one thing. And the other thing that he fetishizes is fertilizers. With his photo that was taken in Tanzania. He talks about his experiment in Tanzania, his experience. He even talked about the creators of fertilizers. But you go to Ethiopia now and the other African countries, my research basically on food system was in Ethiopia. And I had a number of discussions with farmers, and they tell you that artificial fertilizer actually kills soils. Soil is dead. And they repeatedly told me that the soil has become corrupt. That's what they say. Gubo lamdwal in Amharic, meaning, if you don't give him something, it will not give you anything. So it has destroyed the soils, and it doesn't, as I shall say later on, it didn't even help increase productivity that much. And also we know that nitrous dioxide is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And the other interesting thing that he raised about is a myth. His solutions are reductionist because his knowledge in technology is based on reduction science. But what's livestock in our culture? What's the importance of livestock? I know part of Ethiopia called the Bale. Their whole culture is around livestock. And their story, their songs, their spiritual experience, everything. Even the way they divided the year, their seasonality is related to livestock. In almost every part of Ethiopia and a number of African countries, having a livestock in your house and having no livestock in your house is a difference between very poor and rich to that level. So livestock are not meat, that they are part of the family of rural farmers. But he considers producing meat on a petri dish as a solution. So that's where the problem is. I think most of the recommendations, He's already tried for the last 13 years, as you said, Heather, with Agra. So what is the experience with Agra? And I mean, people say that he's a voracious reader, but maybe he's reading, what is brought to him from his own circle. He's not reading outside of his circle. Otherwise, you'd have read the reports of Agra and the assessment that some consultants did. And SCB has done a lot of work on Agra, and quite recently also the Stasi and team. And that there is also research that has come out from Germany, a number of German NGOs and African NGOs, And what does the result say? As you said, it was there in certain countries. The Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa is mainly funded by Gates, even though some governments chip in. And there is no significant increase in productivity, no significant increase in income, increase in malnutrition. But the most worrying aspect of that report is the decrease in the diversity of local crops. If Gates is concerned about the impacts of climate change on families in Africa, he should talk about resilience, and he should talk about the diversity in crops. Resilience is diversity. We adapt to climate change through diversity, not by destroying our diversity. It's so critical. But Agra has reduced the diversity in the certain countries that it has operated. And that's very much worrying. And as I said, farmers are indebted and we're left with dead soils. And they need a lot of work to revive them. And one thing that worries me about Gates is the power that he has. And so he's a power over the narrative of climate change now. And he has a power over the media. You can see then how his book is reported and promoted. In all of the media, there is very little questioning of that book, very little questioning. So he's very powerful. He's very powerful because the doors of our governments are open for him. Anytime he comes, he can go to any African government and doors are open. I remember one time there was Gates was invited to Ethiopia to be given an honorary doctoral for his service. So, and in that occasion, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia and all of the ministers, all the key people in Ethiopia were present. You see, he's such a powerful person. And he pushes digitization of agriculture. Do we need digitization? That's a very much important question. But on one thing, Agra has succeeded, on one extremely worrying thing, which is a changing of policies and legislations. That is the success of Agra in the last 30, 40 years. And that's the most dangerous kind of success, because there was success in changing laws and policies and legislation around seeds, around fertilizer, around investment, biosafety. They have succeeded in changing that, and they have laid the ground for the corporatization of African agriculture and for owning our life, basically. But I'm so happy with what Sylvia has presented also. We have the solution. Can I share one slide in the 2 points, hopefully? Sorry. Okay, where are they? Sorry.
Problem.
Okay. Do you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, no.
No.
Oh, wait. Yes, we do.
Okay. So this is the slide, and these are the publications of AFSA. We have, as you said, Heather, we have a number of publications, And our advocacy and our narrative comes out of the number of researches that we do and the number of publications that we have. One case, look at this diagram. It's a very, very powerful diagram. It's a work of an NGO in Ethiopia called Institute for Sustainable Development, a local and indigenous NGO. And the research was done over 20 or more years on 5 critical crops in Ethiopia: barley, durum wheat, maize, teff, and faba bean. 5 critical crops. And the experiment was started with farmers. You know, they are the scientists here, with farmers. So part of the land was left to be without the application of any chemical fertilizers or compost. And this one is a blue color. The brown color is part of the farmer's land where compost was applied, and green is where chemical fertilizer was applied. And over more than 20 years. At the beginning, the productivity of chemically treated lands was very high for 2-3 years. And after that, as you can see, for all of the critical crops in Ethiopia, productivity is much, much more than chemically treated soils. So it is possible to increase productivity and increase diversity and increase the amount of water in the soil, all that. And there was a recent research done on after the Cyclone Ida. You know, Cyclone Ida has impacted the life of millions of people in Mozambique and in Zimbabwe, and they have compared conventional lands and agroecologically treated lands, like Gates kind of lands and agroecologically treated lands. And this is assessment, that kind of the headline. On the biophysical, we found that agroecological systems had higher absorptive capacity of surface runoff, which is very much important during cyclones, and had the highest level of nitrates contained. This was tested in lab, indicating reducing leaching into river systems and providing improved fertility. Agroecological farmers had higher diversity and, on observation, healthier crops as compared with conventional sized close by. Socially, which is very critical, we found that agroecological farmers, it's a comparative survey, were more inclined to engage in mutual aid and support activity post-cyclone. So if we are talking about climate, adaptation to climate, I think we need to talk about agroecology. Thank you very much, Ida.
Thank you very much, Miljan. Excellent use of slides.
Thank you.
So Matt, I pass it over to you to facilitate our closing dialogue. We have about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to our speakers, and you gave us all so much to think about. If there are questions that our viewers have, please feel free to put in the chat and we'll try and weave those in. But I wanted to open up by both offering you an opportunity to respond to one another, but also pick up on a theme that we saw sort of across all of your presentations was that, one of the ways that Gates frames his interventions into climate is really by siloing different approaches, by a narrow understanding of innovation that doesn't take account the kind of holistic framework through which we kind of see these connections that are so important for building a more equitable and community-based approach to addressing climate change and climate justice. And so in the spirit of reweaving these connections and relations, one of the questions that we want to ask you is, how can we strengthen connections between the food sovereignty movements and the climate justice movements? And how can we connect movements across the various sectors in which Gates is working, from public health to climate to food, to really build a movement to challenge the power of Bill Gates in promoting his techno-driven vision. So I'll open that up for our speakers, and whoever would like to start off with some response.
For us,
Maybe
oh, can you hear me okay? It's kind of internet's unstable. Okay. Yeah, for us, we start with, again, what are the issues on the ground? What are people experiencing? And we know that food is very important to our communities. And so we don't actually start with, hey, climate change, disaster is, coming. Not to say like people don't think about climate change. It's just really starting with what's in front of them, what they care about. And we've had so many, green groups parachute into our communities telling us, right, the ice, Arctic is melting, or the environment, like climate change is coming. And we know, like we're experiencing it. We don't need people to tell us about it, but to start with what people are caring about. But also just to recognize too, like as urban peoples, we have been disconnected from our food source. We're working around the clock. We don't have the same time and energy to cook as we as a culture, losing our cultural foods. And so part of the work is also like Tom and the others are saying, is reconnecting to our traditional practices and cultures, and really reconnecting our relationship to land and our traditions. Something we've been doing is cooking demos, like teaching folks again how to cook, the joy of cooking, and even doing work party days with our friends over at C2C, the community, or taking folks to the urban farm just so that they can see what's possible. Because here in an urban setting, we're disconnected from, we're at the end of the line, right? We go to a grocery store, we buy our food, but where does our food come from? How are we involved with the production and the process? We've been that's been taken away from us. And so I think that's something that we're trying to strengthen as urban peoples. Like, how do we reconnect and see all of this, see ourselves in all of this in our role. And through that, we can fight harder, and for Mother Earth, for the Earth in a deeper way than just like, like the sky is falling, which isn't going to keep people, fighting in a way that is meaningful. In fact, it may encourage burnout, right? If it's not also for our liberation. So I think that's something that as organizers, we should think about, how do we connect to people and relate it to what's going on in their lives.
Tom, Sylvia, Lillian, any of you want to respond?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, but in our work with the Indigenous Environmental Network, we started to take part in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1998. And it was interesting at that time because we found that most of the NGOs, and those coming from the United States as well as NGOs globally, and they operate in silos. It was interesting back then when we brought our articulation as different tribes of Canada, Alaska, and US to the climate meeting. We included our analysis of the effects of global warming, a changing climate change on the ecosystem, on the habitat, on our food system, because there are many tribes in North America that still go and hunt and grow crops, and especially from seeds that have been passed on, fishing, and most of the indigenous people of North America said that the changing climate and the lack of predictability in the weather has affected their rights to food. So it became also and indigenous rights, a rights-based approach, and back to compartmentalization. I mean, the NGOs that were pretty active at that time and still active, um, again, say things like, well, we never looked at how it affects the food system of your people. And we kind of look at, oh, they're pretty stupid, you know. Our indigenous people say that's not too smart of those people. But also the NGOs who work on human rights. We saw that there was a separation in the late 90s and early 2000s between the NGOs, environmental NGOs, conservation NGOs, and the human rights NGOs. So I'm happy to report that a lot of them are working together on this issue. It's a rights issue with many of our people. The other piece with the link between the food movement and the diversity of the food movement too. The global South and the North, you know, we're part of also the rights of nature movement. Our network is part of that. Vandana Shiva is part of that with us. So we're lifting up the right of the seeds. The seeds have rights, especially those seeds that have been passed on by many a local community, whether it's in India, whether it's in Africa, Latin America, North America. It's very precious, eh? And it confronts the Gates type of thinking on the creation of climate smart seeds, climate smart agriculture, using technologies, geoengineering, manipulating the genetic information, and it's problematic. It's disrespectful to a lot of our beliefs as indigenous peoples. That's why we're against these promotions of what Gates represents. Check. Thank you.
My comment on that, I was thinking when you asked, because it's probably different in different parts of the world. And for instance, I'm thinking that for most of the people in, not only in Mexico, but in many parts of Latin America where there are indigenous and peasant communities, there is not such a line like saying now we are speaking about food and then we are speaking about climate or something, because in a way everything is about the defense of the territory and but this is not an abstract thing. Is that communities are linked to the territory, and the territory is like it's not a piece of land, it's been there as a community. And so in that sense, I don't think there is a much difference for communities when they say about about defending their territory and their right to food and and climate and so on that sense. I then understand then what I said is different, but still I think this about this clear separation of working for environmental defense or food in different boxes is more like an NGO thing, yes, but at the level of communities is not the same. And I think that these links, some of the links that I was speaking about, that Jill did, that Tom did, Million, I think it is, in a way, it's easier because it connects to your reality, more directly. So I don't know. I think it's important with the work that all of you are describing is important. I pasted there, for instance, a new section in the Climate Justice Alliance in the US about geoengineering, where they made for me, they made a really good job on having like fact sheets for grassroots, for communities to understand different parts of geoengineering, including, for instance, how CCS, this carbon capture and storage, is coming to your community and it will impact your community. Because CCS is very connected to the oil industry. I didn't say that before. And it won't be just that they, that they so-called absorb carbon dioxide and put it somewhere. No, they have to do a whole lot of infrastructure, pipelines, and make new holes. It's more or less like a fracking wave 2. It's not fracking, it's a different technology, but it will be a lot of impacts directly on local communities that are in those places, but also disputes about land. And suddenly, what they have put on the table, I mean, not only Bill Gates is just like summarizing everything, but is this, new carbon metrics where, everything is measured in carbon now. And then that is what gives money, what is money for carbon markets or offsets, or for the new bills that are being implemented in the US, including in the new administration, are measured in carbon. And who said that carbon is more important than people's health or people's well-being? And there are a lot of other things, and I refer to both, cities or rural areas, and so I guess we have a lot of work to do on information and on cross-fertilizing our different kind of research and how do you say in English, like the things that are important for each of us in our organizations, in our communities, and how those cross each other, because we are in a new context where very few people, and Gates is one of them, has an incredible power to determine so many things, policies, investments, and all kinds of things that will affect our community. So in a way, I personally think the work of the Climate Justice Alliance and others, like probably Climate Justice in Seattle also, and so it's incredibly important just because it does that work of cross-fertilizing, like urban and the situation for workers and the transition and all that. I think that is what is kind of one of the most powerful, or maybe the most powerful tool we have.
Yes, I would love to thank both Jill and Tom for bringing the indigenous cosmology into this. I think that's very much central. That's very much critical. That's what which takes us deeper in this time of change. So thank you very much, Heather. And it's very, very, very critical. And there was a question in one of the chats also about what I said, the importance of livestock in the culture of Ethiopia. Yes, it's true that it's different from one community to another, and they have their own special kind of relationship. And livestock is very much intertwined with their cosmology. So that's very much important to understand. And I'm not sure whether Gates or the people around him have any understanding about that, to be honest with you. Maybe superficial. Hopefully, if somebody was asking whether we want to have a dialogue with Gates, fine. I think, but I don't think it is possible, with the layer of people that he has around him. But we're not saying, and don't take it as if we are against all technologies. We are using technology now even to communicate, to make this possible. But we have to ask a lot of questions, because at the center of technology there is power. So we have to do a power analysis. Who benefits and who loses, and what kind of technology are they impactful? Are they important? Do we have other much more better alternatives? We have to ask a lot of questions around each and every technology. Otherwise, it's not like being against technology. And Gates is described as a philanthrocapitalist. Philanthropism is fine, but what is philanthrocapitalism? It's bringing all the ideas and all this. When you were talking about measurement, Sylvia, that's what came to my mind. Philanthrocapitalists want to bring the capitalist ways of doing into philanthropy. That's part of the problem. I think we can go deeply into that. And AFSA is working on justice, climate justice, both at the regional level and also at 12 countries. Now, 12 countries have done their analysis of their policy environment, climate policy environment, and they are campaigning now to integrate agroecology into climate policies. That's the work we are doing. And we are organizing dialogues in over 25 countries. In all of these countries, and this question of climate would come. So it's a center of our work. That's what I wanted to say. As you know, AFSA members, I mean, if we really have the capacity of reaching, our members have close to 200 million Africans, So it's a large number. It's the biggest alliance out of the 55 African countries. We reach 50 of them. Now we are creating relationship with the North African Food Sovereignty Movement. And when that happens, then we work in all of Africa. That's what I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Well, we have 2 minutes left of the webinar, and I think I'd like to thank you. I want to ask if any of you have anything you want to add before we close, and otherwise I'll pass it to Heather if not.
Yeah, I want to quickly add the issue of carbon farming. That's couched within this discussion and represents what we've been calling climate capitalism. But it's part of planting pollution, and a lot of the audience needs to know that there's a link with what we're denouncing that includes carbon farming. Your land becomes the polluter's carbon dump, you could say. It's called climate smart agriculture. It uses the term of building healthy soils away from dirty soils, regenerating healthy soils, soil carbon sequestration. Carbon farming generates carbon credits or permits to pollute for the polluters. So I just want to add that in there. The big corporations are involved with this, and people need to know about it. And Gates has actually contributed to the funding of carbon farming. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think Noel is actually going to take us to our closing now, but so appreciate everybody who joined us, and big thank you to our speakers.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and to all our speakers for sharing your wisdom. I wish we could continue this conversation all day, but we don't have that kind of time, unfortunately. So we hope that all of you who joined us today will keep this conversation going. And to our speakers, if there's any links you want to share in the chat right now, we will also include those in our recording somewhere. If you want to follow everyone and continue supporting their frontline work, here are some of their handles. You can go to their websites. If you want to support CAGJ, there are many ways to do that. You can become a member, follow us on our social media. If you are interested in volunteering, you can email that email right there, contact us at cagj.org. Remember, we'll send out a recording of this video, so watch it again, share it with your friends, and keep doing the work. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Okay, Hat. Wopada.